Hi Val, thanks for joining. Super excited to see you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I know it's been, I feel like, well, I guess I was in on one of these other AMAs, but technically I haven't like seen you in about forever. So this is super nice.
Yeah, it's been nice for me because it's like something I get to look forward to. Having these like about two of these a week, and keeping me talking to people, which is good.
Yeah. I'm
Yeah,
surprising how
so
different something like this can be from a work meeting. So I also very much appreciate that.
yeah. So the question I like to start with is like, how are you doing? And are you learning anything from this experience, or maybe about yourself or about life?
Yeah. Oh my goodness. I feel like the answer to that question changes every day. Like I know this time last week, I was like a giant ball of anxiety and stress and I literally could not do anything. And this week I'm like, I'm kind of okay right now. Like I can accomplish stuff. I'm not like I'm like pretty much just okay. So that's kind of nice. And I think one of the biggest things I've learned is just, or maybe not even learned, but just appreciated more is like my neighborhood and just all of my neighbors and everything nearby. Because usually I'm traveling so much, I'm never in my house for very long this time of year. And it's like beautiful in springtime and leaves are growing on the trees and there's lots of cute dogs that get walked around. So I feel like I haven't seen that before because I'm usually gone right now. So that's
Yeah,
pretty nice.
I was gonna ask, like, do you normally work from home?
Yeah, when I'm not traveling, I'm usually working from home, but it's not usually this many weeks in a row.
Yeah,
So I've also decided I need to completely redecorate my office.
nice. I can see a little bit behind you, and it looks
Yeah.
nice.
Like everything has to change.
Yeah. Um, and then the other thing I want to ask before we jump into other questions is, normally I ask this at the end, but I thought this time I would ask at the beginning. But do you have anything coming up in your life that we should be looking out for? Like in terms of like, I don't know, any cool like projects or things that are coming out? And then also, are there ways that the community can support you during this time?
Yeah. As far as things coming up, I have a bunch of like online presentations. I should do a better job of posting about those on Twitter
Mhm.
and my site, so I totally will. It's kind of like everything just came together so quickly for a lot of those. I'm just like,
Mhm.
what? It's happening. Um, but yeah, that's kind of it for now. I know I've got some articles in the works and stuff like that, but nothing that has like a hard like release date. But I'm just trying to keep doing as many little things as possible to keep, I guess, distracted. I don't even know what that would be.
Yeah. What are some of the things you're doing to be distracted?
I was originally at the beginning of the year, like working on a brand new talk, a couple of them actually. So I'm working on like making those maybe articles instead, because I don't think I'm going to get to do them at any like in-person events in a while. I also finally finished like writing up just like the random list of things you're like, oh, that was interesting. I should actually write about it. So I've been
Yeah.
trying to go through that list and just kind of like, uh, I don't know, catch up with all those things.
Cool. So we do have a question from Todd. Hi, Todd. Welcome back.
Mhm. Yeah,
He
hi Todd.
said, he said, "Hi, Val. Hi, Gina. How can we encourage teams to default to the appropriate semantic animation when available?"
Oh, yeah, that's a good question because there's definitely a lot of ways to do animation on the web, and I feel like we sometimes like the solution you would turn to first is almost like overcomplicating things, like let's add a bunch of extra divs or a bunch of extra stuff to make this happen. And
Mhm.
maybe there's times where that is the only way to get it done. I mean, that happens, but a lot of the time, the things that we're using to create animations, the pieces that are moving or whatever it might be, can still be like semantic elements like paragraphs and images, and they can be like, I mean, the same things you would have in your whatever, like the DOM, your document anyways, they can just also happen to move. And I think maybe the best way to kind of help your team to think more about that is maybe to like show them more examples of it. If you find some good ones on CodePen or wherever else where you're just like, oh, this is good semantic base for this animation, showing them, you know, I feel like examples is the easiest way to kind of make that connection or to kind of demonstrate that, because otherwise it's just sort of like talking in theory about code stuff, and that can get pretty tough to actually to get everyone to like be thinking the same thing or on the same page.
Yeah. I think like animation, you kind of have to have the examples because it's such a visual thing.
It's true. It's like we all like you can describe animation and it's super fun to do. You can make all the sound effects and noises and whatever else, and it's super fun. But like what a pop means to you or a swoosh to you in your mind isn't necessarily the same as like your coworker or your friend or whoever.
Yeah.
So you can have something, even if it's like a really basic version or sort of like, you know, really lo-fi version of it. If you can have that and the sound effects, because no one wants to lose the sound effects, that would be silly. That makes it so much easier. You know, even if it's something you've drawn out statically or made like little kind of storyboards and things, the more you can share that visually, the more you can get people on the same page. And it's a tough thing to do sometimes because we're all afraid to show stuff we don't feel like we're really good at. So, you know, if you don't feel like, if you're like, oh, this isn't quite right, you don't want to show it, but like you really should. It'll help. It'll make it easier for everyone to know what's going on.
Yeah. I think the semantics around animation is interesting to me. Like I'm not an expert in animation at all. I think when I see a lot of documentation around animation, you know, even like the Salesforce Lightning design system had a page that had all these little buttons you would click to see, you know, the pops and the fades and all that stuff, which is great. But to me, it's kind of like showing a bunch of colors in your system, but not showing the usage of those colors.
Mm-hmm.
So I get curious about things like, you know, one model I'm thinking of is like the layering concept in Carbon design system from IBM. They name their layering based on the type of component it is. So like if it's an overlay component, this is the Z index and the shadowing it would get. So it makes me think about animation in that way of like, you know, bigger components versus small little components, like what animation should be associated in that way rather than just seeing a big selection of choices. So I'm kind of curious, is that how you approach it? And is that what you would recommend? Sorry, that was kind of a leading
Definitely.
question, but
Yeah. No, as you were saying, I'm like Carbon does such a great job with the way they kind of showcase their animation decisions too. You know, they do a really great job, especially in the way it's evolved. Like the current version is a little different than it was maybe a year or so ago, and they kind of really built on stuff nicely. And the one thing they do, and a few other design systems do it as well, is kind of really focus first on those, like, I guess you could call them like the atomic aspects of animation.
Yeah.
Like the first thing they sort of standardize, I guess, maybe that's not the best word for it, but the first thing they kind of cover in their guidelines is the design decisions around those atomic things, like the durations. And, you know, they also, in Carbon especially, and other ones too, you know, they don't just give you like, hey, duration should be 200 milliseconds or 100 or whatever. They actually give you like where those should be used. Like, okay, if it's a button, you're using this kind of duration. If it's a page transition, you're using this kind. And really putting it in context that way. So it's not just like, use this number or else. It's like, you know, you get information around why that decision was made, which also helps you put it into like practice in whatever you're making. And, you know, from there, people usually start with like easing and durations, which sounds super simple, but like deciding on those, like the durations and the ranges or the easing that makes sense for your product or your brand, or how many easings you should have, like what that easing palette should be. It's not like a 5-second decision.
Yeah.
You want it to be, but it's not. You're like, oh, no problem, I'll just pick stuff I like, but then that's not how it works.
Yeah. I admit when I'm like doing any sort of animation in my keynote presentations, I tend to always just pick the same duration for everything. But I definitely understand, you know, if there's a slide where maybe two things are moving and they're moving at the same duration, but one thing just feels like it's chugging along while the other thing is like zip. And so
Yeah.
I'm trying to like understand like when to use longer durations versus shorter ones and all that.
Yeah, it's tough because like, and I can't remember if I talked about this in my clarity talk last year or somewhere else, but like it is really tempting to use the same duration or the same easing all the time because you're just like, I know it. It's all gonna like it looks nice under the hood kind of thing. You see all
Mhm.
those durations the same, but like when you play it back, especially if something is going a very short distance, something going a very long distance, if they take the same duration, they're going to move in a very different way.
Mhm.
And it's like the way it looks, the way it's perceived is more important. We love to have that like uniform control over things, right? Like I think that's one of the hard things to get over when people are first getting into animation is like all of those like, oh, it must always be this number kind of falls apart. Like that
Yeah.
doesn't always work out well. Maybe I wouldn't say never because maybe it does sometimes if you're going for a very, I don't know, specific hard-edged robotic look, but
Mhm.
not so much. But yeah, it's interesting that like, and I think people run into this a lot when they're trying to document these things for their design system. Because if you have gone, like you were just describing when you're doing your keynote stuff, you're just kind of going with what feels right to you in that very specific context.
Right.
But then when you have to kind of break down why that felt right or didn't feel right in that specific context and translate that to some documentation other people can use to make decisions and make that into like some systematic decisions and kind of like all this interconnected stuff. It's just the challenge there is a little different and you kind of have to take a step back and even better understand why you made the decisions you made, you
Yeah.
know, whether you like the end result or not, like you have to know why. And I think that's the hardest part is we just, especially as designers, we just kind of internalize this sort of like gut feeling, and it's really hard to document a gut feeling.
Yeah, for sure.
But
I remember I forgot who it was, but I feel like it was like a manager I had at one of my jobs in the past would always say like whatever duration you pick, cut it in half. Like make it faster, make it faster. So is that something that you find yourself doing too?
it depends. I mean, I think that that's definitely very true in a lot of cases because usually if you're the person making the thing, if you're like, all right, I've got this component, I'm going to add this motion to it. I
Mhm.
want like this to slide down and this to fade in. When you're like in it, you want to see every little like detail of that decision. You want to see every little like speed change, how it speeds up, how it slows down, when it speeds up or slows down.
Right.
And you're like so focused on that to really see that you kind of have to play things slower. And I think when you're stuck in that like zone, you kind of forget that your intention while you're designing it or what you need while you're designing is different than when someone is using it. So you're like, yeah, these, you know, I really want to look at this, really got to get a close look. And then, you know, someone goes to use it or someone who wasn't in that like deep rabbit hole with you goes and they're like, why is it so slow? Because like they're
Yeah.
not looking for those microscopic speed changes that you were looking at when you're designing. It's kind of the same when we do like really any sort of design work like colors or whatever, when you're just like obsessed over this color palette and just taking all this time to pick the right ones, and then you show it to someone else and they're like, okay. You're like, but but like
Exactly.
if you didn't take that time, but what you ended up with probably wouldn't be as good, but like the fact that you put in the time is what made it something they could just be like, great. So in those cases, that's probably where you need to like cut it in half or make it slower in some way. But there's also cases where like where that kind of falls apart is if you've made something that's more complex. I know a lot of times I have noticed people will kind of start with a really simple animation. They're like, all right, I wanted to do this. I wanted to move from here to there. Well, that's always the great base example. And then they are like, well, you know, thinking about the personality of it or what it should feel like, and they just end up picking like a really complex easing, maybe something with a lot of speed changes or like a bounce or spring type thing. Um, and then suddenly what looked really good when it was just sort of like a straight movement with a very simple amount of speed changes, you add this more complex easing and you're like, it's just not right. Like it feels broken and weird. And those are the kinds of cases where you actually probably need to add duration because you no longer had enough time being fractions of a second in this case. So it feels weird to say that, but there like wasn't enough time to see what was happening or appreciate or communicate what that easing was actually doing. So it's like, it's a good rule in most cases, maybe, but maybe it's just not at all. I don't know. It's like, it's one of those things. It's more of an art than a science.
Yeah, for sure. Have you explored animation for native platforms at all? And do you approach that in the same way or like differently, or, you know, what's your take?
That's definitely a place where I rely a lot more on like the developers and engineers and people more familiar with the platform. Because like web stuff, I'm like, cool, got it. You know, like I know how this works. Native things, they're slightly different worlds, and I feel like because I've never built an iOS app myself or an Android app. So I know there's a lot of nuances and details in how those work or how they get put together that I just don't fully know. So those are places where it's like probably a little more back and forth around like, here's what we're going for. Here's what should happen. What kind of things, both that are natively available in that platform, and then also what makes sense to users of those platforms. Like, you know how the whole thing about like where the back button is, and maybe it's not a thing anymore, but it was for a while, but like Android apps had back buttons and iOS apps like didn't. And if you came to an iOS app with a back button in the wrong place, you're just like, what is this? It just feels weird and wrong.
Right.
So like those gotchas are things that I definitely rely on other people for. But the general sense of like why things might be like, why certain parts of the interface might be moving and the intention behind that and what it's for, that stays the same, but it's just like, how do we implement this in this particular platform? So it's like, it's interesting because there's things that just make sense in one place that don't in the other for all aspects of design of these things. But that is one area I wish I knew a little bit more about, like the technical detail of, but maybe one day.
Yeah, I went to Google I/O and watched a talk from one of the people from the material design team, and they were talking about the motion principles that are in material. And even things like, you know, if you're rotating something, maybe you're not always rotating from the center of the thing, like maybe it's from one of the corners because of the type of animation, and like all this stuff. It was kind of mind-blowing for me, and it made me wonder, like, are these principles something I can carry to any platform, or is this a very material thing? And I feel like a lot of what they're doing does feel like you could apply those same principles to other platforms, but I don't know, Apple might have their own completely separate set. I don't
It's true. Yeah. You're definitely not the only one with that question or thinking about it that way. And I think that a lot of us have there's a tendency to just be like, well, material design did it, let's just do it that way. And I mean, they do have a lot of great principles, a lot of great thinking behind their animation principles and their documentation. And, you know, so do some other design systems as well. But I think there's a lot in there that's kind of, that could be reused. Actually, all of it could be reused, right? It's like open source, it's out there. But there's a lot of what they have in there that's kind of like best practice across the board. And then there's also parts and decisions they have in there that are specific to like the brand and feel that material is going for.
Right.
And I think it really comes down to like, if you want your thing to look like and feel like material design, go all in. If you just kind of want to pick up the best practices stuff, the stuff that will most easily be universal and apply across the board, you know, look for that stuff, and then maybe add your own flair if you want more of a unique feel that's not exactly like material. So I think that's the really interesting thing about a lot of these design systems that have really extensive motion documentation. It's like weeding out which parts, or discerning which parts are just kind of like best practice universally, and which things are like their point of view, their opinion on these things. And I find that fascinating. I love reading those, just being like, oh, they've done it that way. Well,
yeah, that actually gets me thinking about that for pretty much anything that you're documenting. Like,
oh, totally.
I find myself following some of the same patterns. Like, for example, I tend to use a 4-base metric system on any product I'm using. So when I'm documenting that, it's like not really specific to that brand. It's usually just a best practice in my experience and opinion. And so it could be interesting to see, as more and more design systems are rolling out all the time, like, what is unique to you versus what is just best practice in general.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
it, I think that's yeah, you're right. It applies to all areas. Like
Mhm.
even, actually, I can't think of like a typical section of a design system. It wouldn't. It's like all of these things, like type, like
Yeah.
you said. There's certain things that are just like smart things to do, or kind of like general rules. I mean, sometimes you break them on purpose, but a lot of the times you don't want to. I don't know.
Yeah.
The whole like learn the rules before you break them, but like you want, usually I think Dan Mall wrote a great article about this, of just like, hey, if you're making a design system, you probably want it to have your own personal, like not personal, but like your brand, your product's point of view. Because if it doesn't, like, why are you putting in all of this work?
Mhm.
And I'm like, well, that's a good question. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, for
More
sure.
time.
Do you have like specific design systems that you use, like specifically for animation, but maybe just also in general, as like your inspiration that you always look at or maybe point people to?
I do. Shocking. One of my favorite, I have yeah. So I love getting, like, if people are kind of trying to figure out like, where should I go with this? And most people that I talk to are like, I've seen material design and should I do that? And it's like, well, I think material has like, I don't know, some like double digit number of pages and sections on motion.
Mhm.
Chances are you probably don't need that for your brand, because it's probably not, you're probably not going like, and it's not like material design just invented those in one day, right? Like they've
Yeah.
been building on this a
And they're
while.
also documenting an entire operating system.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. The scale there is probably not what you need. But I love having people take a look at Firefox's Photon design system, for the animation motion section specifically, and compare that with Material, because they're so drastically different. Materials like a huge in-depth section, and Photon's basically like, use this easing curve, use this duration, go for it.
Yeah.
And they both, I mean, they both accomplish what they need to accomplish, but they are on very different ends of the spectrum. And it's kind of like, where, you know, so you need to start somewhere, and like, where do you feel like you are on that spectrum? I also really love pointing people to Carbon, because I feel like they've done a really great job explaining things. And you can also see when you kind of compare those three, just kind of like how some of the base pieces come together and then are expanded upon in greater detail over time for like, some of the more complex systems. So
Mhm.
really like pointing people to kind of like to those three as sort of like different places along the way of where you might start, or what you might need for what you have to accomplish. There's just, yeah, I think it's just like nice to compare, because I think it's so easy to just find one and be like, well, we're gonna do that.
Yeah.
But even comparing just three, and there's way more out there too. Like Pluralsight has some interesting motion stuff. Audi or Audi, however you say that car. I don't
Oh,
even know.
I don't think I actually know. I think I say Audi, but
Yeah,
I
I think
think
that's
that's
what.
correct.
But they have a really different approach to motion, where they kind of weave it into a bunch of other sections. Like they have a motion section, but it also comes up in like their interaction section. And Fluent does this as well, where they have entire sections around like motion effects.
Mm.
They don't just have the building blocks. They're just like, here's what you like, here is a thing you can make with these building blocks. And I know Lightning was the same way. I'm not sure, I know they're kind of updating some things, but in the past they had a similar thing with the animation building blocks as well. So
Yeah.
I feel like there's such a great variety in the way different brands have approached this, that there's a lot of kind of places to look at and get a feel for what might be closest to what your design system and your brand might need. And I think that's it's just a great way to look at kind of all the different possibilities and figure out where your needs might fit in. It's
Yeah.
hard to start from a blank page, so.
Yeah, admittedly, I usually go extremely minimal when it comes
Mhm.
to animations and transitions, mostly just because, I'm mostly focused on like the visual of it, and I sometimes forget to add in a little bit
Yeah.
of that animation just to make things a little bit clearer of what's happening. But um, what I get curious about is when do you go too far? I know some designers love delight and they love adding in just a little bit of pop like everywhere. And I'm always worried that if once I go in that direction, I'm just going to be like going crazy. And so do you have like any sort of personal things that you always find that you always want to add and things that you try to avoid?
Definitely. I mean, first of all, not really to answer that question, but just like even just doing the basic stuff that's really accomplishing something. Like having that, and especially if you do it consistently, or even sharing that in some way with other designers working on your project, like you've just saved them from having to take the time to make those decisions, and you can be more consistent. So even a little bit is awesome. But I think the thing that the thing that I try to use often and almost never works because I realize it's just too much is like anything with like a spring animation. Like I love the look of springs. I think they're super fun. But it's like, I've never worked on anything where it actually made sense. Like I'll put it in there and be like, yay. And then I'm like, it doesn't actually work. Like you look at the design and how all of the type and colors and stuff are going together and what that's saying. And you look at the spring and you're just like, they don't go together. So one day I will work on something that actually needs them. But so far it hasn't happened.
Yeah.
And it's that context that'll tell you if you've gone too far or done too much. Like that step back and just being like, all right, does this actually fit? And like being really honest with yourself, not like, do I like it, but does this fit? Yeah. Sometimes the answer isn't what you want, but like that's what helps you get better. So
yeah. I remember I was working on a modal for Lightning's design system, Salesforce. Yeah, and I tend to try to use as few divs as possible and like make the markup as clean as possible when I build things out. And so I'm building things very visually and making it scalable and responsive and all this stuff. But my brain never thinks, what all do I need for the animation for this to work?
right.
And so I didn't think about the overlay needing to fade. And that actually required restructuring things completely. And, had I known, I would have built it a little bit differently. And so do you find yourself already thinking about the animation stuff at the very beginning, or is it something you find yourself kind of modifying or refactoring towards?
A little bit of both. Like I like to want to be like, yeah, of course I always think of it from the beginning. I've never done that, but I've totally done that. Yeah. I've totally been like, oh, it needs a background if it's gonna do that, or like the overlay or something. You're just like, oops, go back and add that. And I think it also kind of speaks to having a more iterative process, right? Like we're pretty rarely like just be like, this is the design, I am done. It's just, there's always some back and forth. So, I think we all kind of go back and forth a little bit. I try to think of it more in the beginning because I know I've run into like that situation so many times. I'm like, all right, self, think about what you know is going to happen and try to plan for that. But like, I don't know, I feel like just in life in general, it's not always easy to do that. Yeah. It was great to chat.
Right. Yeah, thank you so much for doing this. And I'll just mention we've got some more coming up. The next one's with Chris Coyer. You're welcome, Todd. Chris Coyer. And then I'm also scheduling some like with Tatiana Mack, Kaleg, who's on the call, as well as Amy Hoop. So lots of calls coming up. But thank you everyone for coming, and thank you, Val, so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me.